Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills, this is Keeper of the Games.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for listening to Keeper of the Games. We are the wildly underqualified, yet mildly entertaining sports podcast, all about sports in the air capital of Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. I'm Tommy Castor, along with the guy who I know has been glued to his television pretty much every day for the last week watching Royals baseball. Weston Mills, welcome to the show, man.
Tommy, sports are back, baseball's back, the Royals are back. It's been good for sure. I contrary to your intro, I normally would be glued, but we did welcome into the world my nephew Beckham Haight over the weekend, so I went and visited him. But I will be honest, we did introduce Beckham to Royals baseball very, very early on. That game was, I think it was the Royals Cleveland game was on while we were doing a little holding and spending some baby time with the nephew. So it's been good, man.
You know, baseball is back officially when you've got, Rex Hudler in peak midseason form with all of his, Hudlerisms that he says throughout the game. So as soon as I heard that, I was like, all right, we're good to go. Baseball is back, baby.
That's right. Rex has been in peak already, and it's been fantastic. You knew with the time off coming back, he was just going to be full Rex right out the gate. There was no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot to get to on this program today. Before we get to any of that, though, I want to remind you to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode of Keeper of the Games, you'll get a notification. That's the best way to know when we have new episodes dropping of the podcast. You can listen to us on all major podcast platforms. We're on platforms like iTunes and Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast. Basically, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, you can find Keeper of the Games right there. Also, you can watch full episodes on Facebook and YouTube by searching for Keeper of the Games, including this episode right here. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at COGPod. That's at KOGPod. And of course, a special thank you to our friends at Title Boxing Club at 21st and Rock Road, as they are the sponsor of Keeper of the Games. So like I said, a lot to get to on this episode. Just a quick, full disclosure. This might be a little bit of a longer episode than what we're used to. I know that we usually try to stick right around an hour, but we've got a lot of sports topics to talk about, including stories about the Kansas City Royals, who kicked off their season last week. We're going to talk about Kansas City Chiefs football. We're going to talk a little bit about high school football and a decision that was made in the state of Kansas, and a whole lot more. That's all coming up, but we're going to start the podcast with some Wichita-centric breaking sports news that at the time of this recording on Wednesday evening, I know this episode drops on Thursday morning, but this is Wednesday evening, July 29th. When we're recording it, this news is just a couple of hours old, and this came down just a few hours ago from the Wichita Wind Surge, as the Wind Surge announced that their majority owner and general partner Lou Schwechheimer passed away on Wednesday afternoon from complications related to COVID-19. Schwechheimer was 62 years old. This is a man that loved baseball, that made it his life's work, and his vision was to bring affiliated baseball back to Wichita. Relocated his New Orleans Baby Cakes to Wichita. Of course, due to COVID-19, no games were played this season, and so sadly Schwechheimer passed away due to COVID-19 before he even got a chance to watch his vision become a reality. So Weston, your initial reaction, obviously very sad, not only for Wichitans and Wind Surge fans, but the baseball community as a whole. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, obviously you have to start right there, right? I mean, it's incredibly sad to hear this, and especially for a man that, did so much to bring this team to Wichita, and the excitement, the buzz that was built. And then to have a pandemic essentially take that season from him, and then ultimately, take his life. It is incredibly sad, and I can't, even imagine what his family's going through and their thoughts. And obviously at this, with this point, baseball certainly is second with something like this, but, incredibly sad. And really the only other thing I can kind of add to that is just, obviously you wish the best for his family moving forward.
Yeah, again, I think, I echo your sentiments. This is incredibly sad, especially for his family. 62, he's still in the prime of his life, and he was still working full time. He was, working tirelessly to finalize that vision of AAA baseball in Wichita with a brand new stadium downtown, and this is, I didn't know Mr. Schwechheimer at all. I had never had an opportunity to meet him, but from people that I know who did meet him and did know him, everybody was, sort of in unison and saying how kind he was. He had never met a stranger. While he had only been a resident of Wichita for a short period of time, he embraced the community. And, you have to think about it from that perspective, Weston. This was a man that saw something in this community and decided to bring a baseball team from New Orleans that was established there, relocate them to Wichita, where he had never lived here before, but he saw something in this community. I'm sure that he, not only saw the financial upside, but he also just saw what this community had to offer him and his franchise. And so, whether the Wind Surge are around for 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, you have to point it back to Lou Schwechheimer as the man that brought them to Wichita. And it's just sad that he's not going to have an opportunity to watch his team take the field at all, the team that he was able to bring to Wichita.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I hope that they can do something. And I certainly anticipate that they will do something to really, honor his memory at the stadium. I would love to see something, obviously they're going to have a corporate sponsor, but for example, let's say it's Cargill. I'd love to see Cargill Schwechheimer Stadium, when you don't have a name, already associated with the stadium. I think there probably isn't a better moment to really do something like that than now. And this was a guy that spent basically his whole life in minor league baseball. I read that he spent 35 years with the Pawtucket Red Sox, was part of the group that bought the Charlotte Stone Crabs. And I don't know if that's the origin of the team that then became the Baby Cakes and then became the Wind Surge. But this is just a man who has done it his whole life. Obviously you have to love minor league baseball to stay at that level, doing it for that long. And like you said, I don't really need to add too much to it, but obviously saw something in Wichita that he wanted to be a part of. And it's just, it's very sad news.
Yeah, it definitely takes a special kind of person to dedicate his life to minor league baseball. There are so many people that they want to get to the big leagues, whether you're a player, a coach, or in the front office. And Lou Schwechheimer was a man who dedicated his life's work to minor league baseball and ended his career and his life here in Wichita for a short period of time as he founded and brought to Wichita the new Wichita Wind Surge from New Orleans. Lou Schwechheimer was 62 years old, passed away on Wednesday afternoon from complications related to COVID-19. Definitely sad news, and our thoughts and prayers go out to Mr. Schwechheimer's family. That's our top story. We're going to get into Major League Baseball now and talk the Kansas City Royals. So this team has been in action for just under a week from our last episode. We broke down what we thought was going to be the 30-man roster for the Royals. We talked a little bit about the pros and cons of this team, Mike Matheny, so on and so forth. But it only means so much, Weston, until you actually have some games to be able to actually look at and analyze. It's a small sample size. The Royals have only played a handful of games so far, but I know we're going to break it down a little bit more deeply here on this show. But from 30,000 feet, this small sample size, your initial impressions of the Kansas City Royals?
I think my initial impression is that they are about exactly what we thought they would be. They're sitting 2-3, a couple games out, which it's funny to even talk about, where you're at in the race. But really, so we've played so there's 55 games left, to talk about what position you're in already does have some significance. But, they came in, they took one in Cleveland. So obviously that's, Cleveland being the front runner in the division and really the team I think a lot of people expected the AL Central would go through. So, it was good there, 3-2 game there. Duffy looked really well in his start, and as of the time of this recording, he's actually looking really good right now as they play. The Tigers had 7 Ks through 5, but obviously more details will come out when the time this podcast is released. So then so far, they've taken one in Detroit, lost one in Detroit. The pitching has been kind of all over the place. We've had some really good performances. We've had, Brady Singer looked fantastic in his major league debut. Duffy looks every bit as good as I thought he would be in his, what I'm thinking is going to be a bounce back year. And then kind of some of the more of what you expected out of some of the middle relief, some of the fringe starters, if you will. Obviously they've had guys hurt and don't have Brad Keller and haven't had Jacob Junis, and they need help in the rotation. But I think we've seen so far a lot of what we expected.
So we're going to break down the pitching in just a couple of minutes, both Danny Duffy and some of the other pitching concerns that the Royals have here early on in the season. But I want to start with Adalberto Mondesi, who's had a really rough start to the season. Now, at the time of this recording, it looks like he's had a better game. The game is currently going on against Detroit. So by the time this podcast drops, that game will be final, and we'll see exactly how Mondesi finished the game. But early on in the season, he struggled mightily at the plate. He's made a few base running blunders as well. Just hasn't really looked like himself. And that's, a cause for concern for sure for the Royals. Mike Matheny talked a little bit about Mondesi's struggles here early on in the season.
Yeah, he's pressing. Yeah, no question. And you can see that it's in his mind about maybe not even wanting to get to 2 strikes and then getting real defensive even a little earlier than what he needs to. And it's only natural, too, to try to make up for that by being over-aggressive, trying to be maybe even quicker than you need to defensively. So we're just going to continue to talk to him, get him to breathe a little bit. He's such a pure, natural player, everything he does. And I know there's things that right now he's just not happy with. He knows he'd love to be standing on second base and wants to be on second base on that pop-up as well. Those sort of things, they just kind of seem to snowball when you get onto a little bit of a bad run.
So here's my question for you, Weston, about Adalberto Mondesi here early on in the season. Mike Matheny talked a little bit about how, they want to talk to him and just get him to breathe and get him to relax a little bit. In a 162-game season, I think you can do that. Players can slump, and you can say, hey, look, hang in there, relax a little bit. We're going to work with you. We're going to be patient with you. Can you do that as much in a 60-game season, or does there have to be more drastic action taken with a guy like Mondesi to get things turned around quicker?
I don't know about drastic action, but, here's the thing about Mondi and the Royals is – it doesn't matter if he performs well, pulling him, they're not going to win baseball games. They need Adalberto Mondesi playing good baseball to win, period. He is one of the 3 guys that have to produce for this team to win games. So if he's not producing, I don't think there's any benefit in pulling him or sitting him down. Now, I guess with that being said, sometimes taking a game off is just good for any major leaguer, right? Really anything you can do to break the slump. But here's the thing. I think it's a lot of early talk in the baseball season that is a little bit shortened. He's going through a slump. He's not counting today's game, was going into tonight 2 for 21, which is not good. That's not good at the plate. Then, like Matheny said, a lot of those other mental things that really do snowball when you're struggling at the plate. But look, it's an early season slump. Baseball is a game of averages. It's going to correct itself. I have no doubts at this point. I don't know why anyone would have any reason to think that he won't correct himself and get back on that right path. But, in the meantime, they just have to stick with them because they have to have him producing at a high level to be able to compete, for the pennant.
So here's a couple of things, my thoughts with Mondesi. So, the game on Tuesday night against Detroit, there are players that have really bad nights, and then there are players that have nights that you never want to talk about again. You want to completely put it out of your mind. And that was the game for Mondesi on Tuesday night. He was 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts. And I think most critical was a base running mistake that you don't really see very often from a guy the caliber of Mondesi. And I think you go 0 for 4 at the plate, you strike out a couple times, you have a bad night. It happens. It could very well be who you're facing, on the mound, and they could be throwing really nasty stuff, and you just don't pair up well or match up well with them. That base running mistake, I think, to what Mike Matheny was saying, you can definitely tell he's pressing. You can definitely tell he's trying to do too much. He's trying to extend plays. He's trying to take extra bases. And while you have to applaud the aggressiveness and the initiative, it's kind of foolish at the same time too. I think that this is the first time in this early season for the Royals that you get an understanding of what these players mentally are thinking with a 60-game season. You don't have, like I said, the luxury of just sitting back and waiting for the game to come to you. You just don't have that luxury. You have to go out and get it, and you have to be disciplined in it. And unfortunately, up to this point, Mondesi just hasn't been able to do that. Will he turn it around? Probably. And like I just mentioned, the Wednesday night game against Detroit is currently going on as we speak. And I saw before we came on the air, I think he hit a double, over the center fielder's head, which is great. And, maybe that's the slump buster he needed. But, I think it's concerning for the Royals if it's prolonged any longer. And to your point, it's not like they really have a replacement that can come in and can perform any better than Mondesi. The other point I'll make about Mondesi, and I really need him to turn things around because he's on my fantasy baseball team. So that was not, I'm not sure as of right now, that was the best pick I've ever made in my life.
Well, and one thing, I remember I had a baseball coach tell me one time, a long time ago, that baseball is the most individual team sport there is. It is such, even though it's a team sport, it is so driven by individual results. But with that being said, it's still a team sport. And I think what's hard to often do and what Monty needs to do is realize, look, I'm struggling right now. I have to put trust in my teammates that they're going to pick me up. And if I don't produce, someone else will. And it goes back to the, I don't need to stretch something into a double that's not a double. I don't need to try to steal a base, when I otherwise wouldn't, I didn't get a sign or didn't get the call just to try to go out and make a play to make up for what I'm doing, or, try to backhand a ball and, from shortstop and make a throw that otherwise you might just eat it and live to see the next batter. And that's something that he'll get. And he's still young. That's something you have to remember, that while he isn't a rookie where you say, okay, you know what, we're going to sit him down, we'll put somebody else in, because we don't necessarily, he's not the group of guys that we need to produce night in and out. He is a veteran in that sense, but he's still young. He's still kind of going through some of those, I think, growing pains of being a vet. This is maybe his first year that you might consider him a veteran, even though he is so young. So I think just a lot of that. It's nothing that concerns me at this point. Every single guy on this roster is going to go through something similar at some point throughout this 60-game season. You just hope that this is Monty's just getting his out of the way a little bit early.
And to your point, as far as having his teammates pick him up when he's struggling, offensively, there have been, some Royals that have looked really good here early on. I know Whit Merrifield has had a good start to the season. Jorge Soler has looked good. I know he and Salvi hit a couple of home runs the other night against Cleveland. So there are those guys that are there waiting in the wings that can sort of carry Mondi on their shoulders if need be. But obviously the hope would be that he's able to turn things around. I think the more pressing concern for the Royals is pitching. Now, we talked about that. You mentioned it just a couple of minutes ago about the starting pitching. Danny Duffy has looked really good. And of course, Brady Singer had a good debut as well for the Royals. But I want to go all the way back to opening day. Now, obviously, this is old news. When you've got teams playing every single day, there's always going to be something new. But I want to go back to opening day because I think that was the first look at how Mike Matheny is going to manage this ball club in his first season. And we talked about it last week about how he had been kind of an old school coach for the Cardinals for a long time, didn't really embrace analytics, didn't really want to embrace analytics. It looks like Matheny might be kind of changing his ways and evolving in Kansas City due to what he did with Danny Duffy on opening day, pulling him, I believe, after just 5 innings when Duffy was pitching pretty well. I know ultimately that outcome didn't work out for the Royals, but I want to ask you, do you understand the rationale that Mike Matheny had in doing that? Are you on board with that? Or, was that kind of the first opportunity for Royals fans to question what Mike Matheny's doing in the dugout?
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys as Weston the Royals fan, because Weston the Royals fan's allowed to be irrational and contradict himself and talk out both sides of his mouths. But so I want to go back to your comment about analytics because, and I think it was one of the Cleveland games, and I can't remember exactly which one, but if you remember, there was a ball hit up the middle, there was runner on first and second, and Matheny had a shift on. This is game 2 of the season, and he had a shift on. So instead of being at double play depth, where we would have easily just turned that double play, been out of the inning, and a ball gets hit up the middle because nobody's there because we're in a shift. And I'm thinking to myself, Great. Love analytics. No problem with that. But we're 2 games in. You're trusting a hitting chart from 2019, especially in a year when you've got COVID and all the other weird things that you wouldn't necessarily think you're going to be able to take a hitting chart before because you don't know how guys are reacting. I just don't know why you wouldn't play straight up there. And so, again, still Western Royals fan talking because you guys will hear me later on. I'm sure I will come on this podcast and complain, why wasn't he following the analytics? Why wasn't he shifting? I know that's going to happen. So now going back to Weston, the podcaster, and, I think to some degree when you talk about I think, for instance, you had asked me about kind of pulling Danny Duffy a little bit early in that game when he was throwing pretty well. I'm going to give Mike Matheny a lot of room on those kind of decisions because with a 60-game season, a rotation that is hurting and Danny Duffy being, one of the few guys you're really going to lean on, I'm going to kind of give him some leeway to pull guys early, make those decisions that might not be your normal baseball decisions, but you're thinking about, okay, I've got a 60-game season. I got to keep guys healthy. I have to be able to, maybe throw a starter back out in 4 days from now, to pitch when you're otherwise giving him a week between starts. I think there's just a lot of weird, just caveats with this season that Matheny deserves some leeway, at least in the beginning, on those type of decisions. Now, we're 30 games in, and you don't see other managers making these decisions, and Matheny's losing games, and you feel like it's because of some of those decisions that you don't see other managers making. Okay, we can kind of hop on discussing whether he's making the right calls or not. But for now, I feel like he deserves a little bit of leeway.
So why don't we hear from Mike Matheny about his rationale for pulling Danny Duffy in the 5th inning on opening day, and then when we get done with that, I'll tell you why I disagree with you on that entire take.
Well, we're looking at most likely not having Danny once he gets a couple guys on. We're getting to the top of that order. There's a good chance he's not going to see the third time through with the top. We got a right-hander, one of our better right-handers, hot, and a right-handed hitting 9-hole hitter that we feel we will be tough to roll him up, but we still like our chances there with Barlow getting us the ground ball that we did get, but unfortunately it didn't work. But thought was we knew we were going to go in that direction once we got it kind of the heat turned on. Actually had Barlow going as soon as hit the leadoff man. Just trying to do exactly what we said. We're gonna chase every win with everything we got and try to take our best shot. Danny did a fantastic job getting us to that point.
So I understand the rationale and I understand where you're coming from with your take on, and I think what you said sort of lines up with what Mike Matheny is talking about, as well. But my counter to that is you're only playing 60 games. And I'm going back to what you said when you were talking about Adalberto Mondesi and about how you pull him, he's struggling, you pull him, who are you going to replace him with that's going to be any better? Who's better than Danny Duffy in that starting rotation? I understand not really wanting to face the Indians lineup a third time through the lineup. I get that. I understand that the statistics say that, the first time you're going to, get this batting average out of them. The second time it's going to be a little bit higher. And the third time it's going to be much higher than that. I understand all that, but about, being a 60-game season, you got to win right now. You can't be necessarily looking at, all right, I need to save a guy for 3 days from now or 4 days from now. You got to win right now because every game counts more so than ever before. So I don't know. I sort of second guess the decision, to pull Danny Duffy in the 5th inning when he is your ace of the rotation. I think you need to ride him a little bit more. I'm not saying that he needs to go out and pitch a complete game, but I'm saying give him a little bit more leeway to finish out at least the 5th, maybe the 6th, and maybe even into the 7th inning, because pitching, and especially in the bullpen, that's been a struggle for the Royals. So I don't know. I understand the rationale, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't necessarily agree with it.
Yeah. And now that I hear Matheny say this again, and it actually it's going to go back to me kind of contradicting myself again, because here's the rationale, right? So you got Duffy. We just talked about the statistics, third time through. So you bring in Scott Barlow, and this actually, I was mentioned this earlier, and I'm just now putting together that this was this whole ordeal. You bring in Scott Barlow. That's when you had a runner on first and second. You bring in Scott Barlow because he's a sinker. He's a sinker ball pitcher. So that means you're going to get a lot of ground outs with sinker ball pitchers.
Yeah.
So you bring him in, and then you shift out of double play depth. That doesn't make any sense right off the bat. And I get it. I'm sure they had a hit chart on whoever was at bat that last year they only pulled the ball and maybe 8% of the time, 10% of the time hit the ball up the middle. But still, everything I just said. So, I mean, if you're going to do that and bring in Scott Barlow, play the double play. That doesn't make any sense.
It was Oscar Mercado batting for the Indians, and he hit a chopper that typically Mondi would have fielded and it would have been an out had he been standing where a shortstop normally stands. Mm-hmm. So I think that goes back to my original question about Mike Matheny is, this guy he came into Kansas City. He even said it in his quote. He wants to do exactly what he said he was going to do. And what he said he was going to do was embrace analytics. Does that mean he's embracing analytics to the detriment of the team? I think there's a place for it. I think it's really important, but I almost feel like he might be overcorrecting a little bit, where it's kind of like, man, like there's a good happy medium between completely ignoring it and doing it way too much. And I think that part of that is this is a new squad, that he's only played a handful of games. The talent level is probably not ideal for him. And so it's probably one of those situations where it's going to be a learning process. But I agree with you to the point when you said, all right, after 30 games, if he's still doing this stuff, all right, now's the time to sort of, be concerned about it. But I think we can give him the benefit of the doubt right now that maybe hopefully over the next handful of games or so, he'll get it worked out. Also, and this is kind of more away from Mike Matheny and more just about personnel on this team, pitching injury-wise is a big concern for Kansas City. I know you mentioned a couple of the guys that are still not back and pitching for the Royals in Brad Keller and Jacob Junis, but Mike Montgomery is on the injured list now. Foster Griffin is on the injured list now. We just talked about Foster Griffin last week before the season started, and the Royals announced in the last few days that they're signing Matt Harvey to a minor league contract. I don't know if that's going to end up working out, but clearly the Royals have some issues staying healthy with their pitching staff.
Yeah, boy, and how disappointing for Foster Griffin. He came in and looked great in the inning and 2/3 that he threw in relief. Boy, just so disappointing. And I certainly hope we don't, they calling it a forearm strain, and I certainly hope that we don't find out that he's going to need Tommy John. But looked good, getting some guys healthy. I love the Matt Harvey signing. I don't know what he'll turn into, but to me, those are that's such a low risk, high reward signing that I don't know why you wouldn't, kick the tires on that. I mean, I want to say that the contract was like $525,000, which is pennies, for a major league contractor. And I think it was actually a minor league contract. But I mean, no reason not to bring him in, and especially with the rotation help, you might actually get to see him this year. I read somewhere, and I don't know, it was an early report, so I don't know if it's since been contradicted, but that the idea of bringing in Matt Harvey was actually for 2021 and not for the 2020 season. But that seems weird timing, but that was a report. I mean, it was from Jeff Flanagan or somebody. I named Flanny, and it probably wasn't him, but it was somebody, and that's where I saw it at. But I don't know that necessarily makes sense. I'd love to see him this year if he's ready to go.
I'm not sure that if he does make it to the big league squad, if they do end up bringing him on, they might, out of necessity, have to start him. But I would imagine that the goal would be to make him a reliever. I just don't think he's got the form anymore to be a viable starter in the big leagues. Maybe he does, but you've seen, there have been a number of high profile pitchers over the years that started their careers as really dominant starting pitchers. They got hurt. They spent time on the disabled list. They bounced from team to team, and they ended up actually extending their career by a few more years by just pitching out of the bullpen. So that wouldn't surprise me. But at the same time, the Royals really need starting pitching help. So they might not be able to fulfill that. They might just have to throw him into the rotation because they just don't have anybody else. So how big of a concern do you think this starting pitching injury list is right now? I mean, you've got Junis, you've got Montgomery, you've got Keller, now you've got Foster Griffin. I mean, how concerned should the Royals be about the injuries to their pitchers?
I don't think actually overly concerned, because you've got Keller and Junis who, it's COVID, and you certainly hope to see them back soon. Then you've got Duffy, and Brady Singer looked fantastic. So there's 4 starters right there. that you really plan to lean on. And, I don't think you expected. I mean, I think Montgomery was going to be in the rotation and probably last through the rotation all year, but I think he's pretty bad. I don't think we were going to get a lot out of him.
Don't sugarcoat that at all.
Boy, I mean, I just have not seen anything. I mean, I think he's kind of one of those guys that has good stuff that's never really been able to hit the marks to make his good stuff work. But I do want to take a moment, though, and highlight I think one of the highlights out of the pitching staff as a whole. How about Greg Holland in his return to Kansas City, getting a save in Cleveland, has pitched 3 innings and only allowed 1 hit in those first 3 innings. So happy for that guy. 1, to be back in Royals blue. 2, and just to be actually getting healthy and pitching some good baseball. I know he really struggled a little bit over the last 2 years with injuries and just his time as a whole. I think he was in Colorado was his last stop. So glad to have him back. Good to see him doing well, and really hope to see some more out of him.
The final Royals topic that we're going to mention here before we move on and talk about Major League Baseball as a whole has to do with the newest part owner of the Kansas City Royals, and that's Patrick Mahomes. We're going to talk a lot about Patrick Mahomes at the very end of the show. I think it's kind of the obligatory Pat Mahomes comment. I think we're contractually obligated to talk about him at one point or another during every single episode of this podcast. I mean, we could just rename it the Patrick Mahomes podcast, I guess. We'll talk about him. We'll talk about him a little bit later in the show. However, I do want to mention the fact that he is now part owner of the Royals, which is just incredible. And it just shows, again, his dedication to the Kansas City community and the fact that he wants to be a cornerstone in this community for a long time to come.
Yeah, I mean, this guy just gets it, right? I mean, he understands obviously, I'm not even trying to phrase like, oh, Patrick made a sacrifice by becoming an owner in the Royals to deepen his roots in Kansas City. I mean, I'm sure this guy was jumping up and down to be part of ownership of a pro sports team. I mean, who wouldn't? But I mean, seriously, though, on the other side of that, his reputation in Kansas City, I don't know how it could be any possibly higher. I mean, he has just put himself into a city that he knew nothing about, was forced to play for their team. I mean, that's essentially what the draft is. It's saying you have no choice. If you'd like to play in our league, you have to play for this team. So didn't have to come in and didn't have to embrace Kansas City the way he has. Absolutely been fantastic, and would love to see eventually someday maybe him be an owner player. We can get a few innings. The Royals need some help in that rotation.
Yeah, I mean, with the arm that he's got, I mean, he could very easily pitch a couple of innings in relief, and I'm sure he would actually probably do decent.
I read an article about a high school game that he pitched in, and I can't remember now. There was a ton of scouts, and they were actually there for whoever he was throwing against, and I can't remember who it was, but how he just, absolutely dominated, and he just threw so hard, and I can only imagine he could still probably clock mid to upper 90s, I would have to think, with a baseball still. I mean, the arm strength is so incredible.
Yeah, the final thing I'll say about this topic with Pat Mahomes is new part owner of the Kansas City Royals is that, for the longest time, probably since the late 70s or early 80s, my guess would be, as far as when you're talking about the most popular Kansas City sports figure, was always George Brett, right? And George Brett was a rock star, still is a rock star in Kansas City. I never thought there would be somebody that could come in and eclipse the superstar status that George Brett has in that city. And Patrick Mahomes has done that at an incredibly young age. Can you imagine where he's going to be if he spends his entire career in Kansas City, but then makes Kansas City his home after his career is over with? The sky is the limit for the popularity. He could run for mayor right now and he would win in a landslide. I can only imagine his popularity in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, no, there is definitely no doubt. And the other thing, you mentioned eclipsing George Brett, but also doing it in such a short amount of time. But I think as far as there's been a lot of talk up here in Kansas City over the last few years with the Royals run, and then obviously the Chiefs Super Bowl last year, about whether this was a baseball town or a football town. And I think the thing about Kansas City, it is a Kansas City town. Like, Kansas City will support Kansas City teams like nobody's business. Yep. So he's got all this support, and I think he's going about it in such a great way. Obviously there's one thing to like personalities, like, oh, this guy's fun to root for, this and that, but he just radiates this personality of being a good guy and caring about the town that he's playing for, which doesn't come across that often, and not to any fault of any of the other players in the league. I think it's just hard to do. So super exciting to have him a part of the baseball group, and it'd be fairly cool to see he's got a Super Bowl ring, an MVP trophy. Now, do you think maybe he'd get a World Series ring? That'd be pretty impressive.
Yeah, that'd be pretty amazing. I mean, you mentioned that Kansas City just supports all things Kansas City. And, you talk about a team that we haven't even discussed on the show is Sporting KC and how popular they are. Right. And people love them and are obsessed with them. So anything Kansas City related, that community is going to support it. And we've seen that time and again, especially with a guy like Patrick Mahomes. All right, let's talk about Major League Baseball here on Keeper of the Games. I'm not even going to get into how we got to this point. There have been so many moving parts about this Miami Marlins COVID-19 outbreak that has happened over the last 72 hours plus or so, back to last weekend, and then, to even today. All that happened. We just know that there's a Miami Marlins outbreak. We're not going to talk about why. We're not going to talk about how it happened, but we are going to talk about how does this not only impact Major League Baseball, but then other sports as well, who are looking at Major League Baseball as an example of how it could work to run a professional sports organization in the coronavirus era. And that's exactly what's going on right now with the Miami Marlins. I don't know about you, Weston, but there were a few hours on Monday when this all was breaking that I really thought Major League Baseball was going to be done. I just thought, you know what, this is going to be too much for them to handle. The PR is going to be really, really bad. They're just going to shut the whole thing down. Now, that hasn't happened as of now. The Marlins are not going to be playing through this weekend, and they're going to have to reshuffle the schedule and all of that. But how big of a deal is a team outbreak like the Marlins to the integrity of a shortened Major League Baseball season?
I mean, to me, I just think to some degree, right, the results of how these guys take it, I think matters. I mean, if you have an outbreak of, I don't know where we're at now, 15 or something like that. But if you have an outbreak of 15, they miss a week of baseball, nobody really has symptoms or has any long-term effects. And whether that's a right or wrong approach, I'm not saying one way or the other. I think ultimately then it becomes just a story we told about the beginning of the MLB season. But I do think if it is more than one team, because as you saw there, it wasn't just that the Marlins games were canceled. Whoever they were playing that first day, then their game that night got canceled with, I should be a little bit more prepared, but I think it was the Yankees, and whoever the Yankees were playing, that game got canceled because obviously you don't know. I mean, you can test, but those results aren't coming back right away. So it is affecting. So if you had more than one team, that could be a real domino effect of taking time off. And I would anticipate do things just kind of get pushed back. Like if we were to go multiple teams that are ultimately sitting out games, does it just push the season back? Does it affect, the season as a whole? It looks like Rob Manfred said that really they didn't ever consider shutting down the season, even though reports to the contrary were out there. So whether that's right or not, I don't know. But I think ultimately it's not going to be a huge deal. And I think to some degree, right, this is what we talked about in the beginning of the season. That's the whole point of the taxi play, or the taxi squad of players and this and that, so you can plug and go. Now, obviously 15 is a little bit more, but maybe there needs to be a discussion of expanding that taxi squad so that you can throw in 10 more guys and go. And that's really just from a competitive standpoint, that should just be on the Marlins. Those players clearly to some degree must have been, not doing the right things. And I understand some of it you're not going to be able to avoid, but, that's really just part of this season and the competitive edge of doing everything you can to stay healthy.
The commissioner of baseball, Rob Manfred, was on MLB Network talking about how he does not consider the Marlins outbreak to be a nightmare scenario for Major League Baseball.
I don't put this in the nightmare category. I mean, obviously, we don't want any player to get exposed. It's not a positive thing, but I don't see it as a nightmare. We built the protocols to allow us to continue to play. That's why we have the expanded rosters. That's why we have the pool of additional players. And we think we can keep people safe and continue to play.
That's exactly kind of what you just, talked about and you alluded to about the expanded rosters and some of the protocols. I do think it's a nightmare scenario, not just for Major League Baseball, but for other sports leagues who are looking at Major League Baseball as an example of how you can run a league right now. And I really think that's a big issue. And I want to talk in a little bit about college football, talk about the NFL in a few minutes as well. But in the lens of Major League Baseball, you have to compare them to their contemporary that is also getting ready to restart right now. And they've been in a bubble for the last several weeks, and that's the NBA. Now, I'm not an NBA fan. I haven't been an NBA fan for a long time. I don't enjoy watching their games. I don't like it, but I have to give Adam Silver credit where credit is due. I thought the bubble idea was ridiculous when it first came out, but I do know that they just tested all the players in the bubble and there were 0 confirmed cases of COVID-19 because the NBA and the Players Association had taken the protocols seriously. They've taken the risks seriously. I don't feel like Major League Baseball really has. I think they've kind of thrown some ideas out there, but if they really truly had taken it seriously, there were options, there were avenues for them to help protect the health of their players. I think you're going to continue to see more players opting out. I think you're going to be able to see more players that would have never played in Major League Baseball this season playing, which then if you look at, if there are 17 or however many Marlins players that tested positive and you're replacing them with these taxi squad players, are they really the Miami Marlins anymore? Is that really fair? Is that really something that's representative of Major League Baseball? So I do think that there are some major issues there that need to be addressed. And, I don't think that, while I don't think it's the end of the world, I don't think it's something that, I think that I'm advocating for them shutting the season down for. I do think it's something they're going to have to take more seriously in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying about, the bubble in the NBA. I just don't think that's reasonable for really any sport outside of basketball. I mean, they've got
why not
a 15-man roster to be able to bubble those many teams. And not only that, they're essentially just playing the playoffs. I mean, I know it's not the playoffs, but you've eliminated, 10 teams even from continuing the season. So you've not only are you 15-man rosters, but then you've cut 10 teams. Bubbling that many people in personnel is a lot different than getting 30-man rosters for 32 teams for 60 games, through October. That's just a different, whole different ball game. And I mean, could it have been done? Maybe. But I think that.
But why not try? Why not at least try? And that's something that, I think you have to point the blame at Rob Manfred. I think you have to point the blame at Tony Clark with the Players Association. I think you have to look at the players because we discussed it on this show a couple months ago when they were negotiating on how, a relaunch of the season would look like. And there were talks about having, the Arizona site and the Florida site, the spring training sites, playing games only there and sort of bubbling and quarantining the players in those locations where there would be no travel. I know that you're not traveling cross country right now, but you are traveling from, in some cases like from Miami to New York and Philadelphia, to Atlanta. And like there is some travel there. I think you could have at least attempted if the owners and the players could have gotten together and actually worked collaboratively. They were too worried about the money and they were less worried about the actual safety protocols.
But ultimately, I guess to me, what is the bad effect that happened here? Like if these players got COVID and they're fine, and we ultimately missed a week of baseball, and I say the Marlins missed a week of baseball and doubleheaders have to get played. And the players were willing to assume this risk, which they must have been because, like you mentioned, the players union and the owners, they voted down, they just weren't interested in the bubble idea. Then what's the adverse effect of this happening? It can't get much worse than what happened. I mean, I guess it can, but not much worse than what happened in Miami. And we're still carrying on. So, I think that's just ultimately, to me, it doesn't feel like a huge deal as things have been sorted out.
I do think that as far as adverse effects and adverse reactions, you have to look at, again, other sports leagues. I think that if you've got a Miami Marlins team that had 40% of their team test positive for COVID, I think it's wishful thinking to think that there will be a college football season the way that we have envisioned a college football season. I just don't see that being a possibility when, you were just talking about how, all right, the NBA had a 15-man roster and a handful of teams in a bubble, and that's not reasonable for Major League Baseball. If it's not reasonable for Major League Baseball, it for sure is not reasonable for college football or the NFL for that matter. So I think that, I think there need to be some big time conversations about whether or not we can even see any kind of college football season in the fall.
Yeah, but again, just to play devil's advocate again, if these baseball players, if nothing is happening, right, and they're willing to, I got COVID, I set out my 10 days until I know it's 14, but until you've basically got 2 negative tests, why can't that be replicated at the college level? It's just acknowledging.
There's a huge difference though between, Major League Baseball players that are making millions of dollars a year to play the game and a bunch of college kids that they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. So the assessment of the risk is going to be significantly different for these young kids who are not getting compensated to play a game, but yet taking the risks of potentially getting sick while they're on the field.
Yeah.
And just in the last 24 hours, I think it might have been Virginia Tech. I don't remember the exact school, but we had our first collegiate football player opt out of the season, say, I'm not doing it. I'm not playing. I'm going to train for the year and get ready for the NFL draft. I think you're going to see more of that happening if there isn't something done with college football in the fall.
I don't disagree, but again, when you're talking about assessing the risk, when you look at the age group of these players, the risk is virtually none of having that's what the data has shown so far on that age group of range. Now, absolutely, there's no reason not to set this up to even protect them from getting that. And then, absolutely they should be able to opt out. And if they opt out, they should be able to have another year of eligibility for 2021 or tack it on at the end, or just, they can obviously, like you said, train and go pro. But if the risk is so low, I think really the focus needs to be on protecting the folks that are actually making money in college sports. It's going to be the coaches that are at risk, and what are we doing to be able to protect them? I think, to me, that's where the bigger risk lies. And I only even point that out because, when you compare college to pro, you say, okay, the pro athletes, they're making money. These college kids aren't. Well, these college kids are at a virtual non-risk of having serious effects of COVID. Now the coaches are, and we know how quickly this spreads and how easily it can spread. And those are the folks, but those coaches are getting paid. So, I think to me, it does seem like a comparable assessment of pro to college, even though when you talk about the actual athletes, they're not getting paid compared to the ones that are.
I just think that seems reckless to me, because while I agree with you that the data shows that age group, the risk is significantly lower of death or, extreme adverse health reactions, it's not just the coaches. Think of everybody else in the program that these players, and not just in the program, but at the university level, that they're in contact with. And these players, especially on a football team, and Weston, you know this better than I do because you played football. You know how tight and in close quarters these players are with each other. They're living together, they're eating together, they're rooming together, they're going to class together, they're working out together, they're doing all this together. They're interacting not just with coaches, but with trainers and with, people that work in the administration and all of these other, equipment managers. And I mean, everybody that has anything to do with the football program, professors, other students, they're interacting with all of them. Mm-hmm. If there's an outbreak, then you better believe then it's going to be spread. It's going to, and are you going to tell 19 or 20 or 21 year olds to not go out? That's not going to happen. They're for sure going to go out. And then there's the potential of spreading it even more. So I think that's been the big caveat with all of this, especially at the college level, is that it's not necessarily that these players themselves are going to get sick. It's that they're going to spread it more than likely. And so what do you do to mitigate that? Are you going to try to put each individual program inside a bubble? Are you going to have them not leave their dorms or their apartments? Are you going to have them report just to the gym and to the football facility and then back to their rooms? How are you going to manage that? And that's something that has to happen at the institutional level. But the problem is that there's not going to be any kind of standard set, or at least there hasn't been right now, from Mark Emmert and the NCAA to determine how this needs to look from an NCAA viewpoint all the way down. It's going to be each individual member institution implementing their own protocols, and who knows if one school is going to be better than another. I just think you're setting yourself up for some really risky events happening in the fall.
Look, and I don't disagree that there's risk associated, and I definitely agree with you that the focus of the risk is on, the other people around the program per se. But here's the thing: if the universities are open, which I know we're getting a mixed bag of what's going to even happen with colleges, whether there's 90 guys playing football or just kids as a whole mass walking the university, going out on the weekends to the bars, or if there's not bars open, they're sure going to have house parties and those kind of things. That's still putting everybody else on that campus that you just mentioned are around those football players at risk anyways. I don't know that because 90 guys are playing football together, and frankly, 90 guys that are going to be highly more monitored than every other kid that's streaming through a university classroom, lunchroom, athletic training. Well, athletic training room obviously is just mostly going to be the athletes, but the campus gym, like they're going to be monitored, tested, have folks looking down on them way more than the rest of the student body. So I don't think because you're playing football, it's adding extra risk to those other people. Again, I think the two groups that I think of probably the most are the athletic training staff. You're going to have a mix of students and adults, the adults who are getting paid, obviously the athletic students who it is part of their curriculum to become an athletic trainer, and then the coaches. Coaches are getting paid. Athletic trainers are getting paid. It's going to be the same conversation you would have with the fifth grade teacher that has to go back to school, the warehouse worker that's working at Amazon that has to go to work. It doesn't make it safe, but it's part of what we're doing. I mean, I don't know. I get, here's the other thing too. We have talked about this several times. There's not a lot of right answers, right? I mean, we're trying to all figure it out all at the same time, all as quickly as possible. So I think a lot of what you've said, I don't even disagree with, even though I'm coming off as I fully disagree with it. I think I can argue with myself 5 different ways on they should, they shouldn't, it's risky, it's not risky. And that's part of, I think, what's causing a lot of the problems is I think a lot of people feel that way.
Well, and the other thing too, and my opinion of this is that the biggest issue with what's happening with college football and what could potentially happen with college football is, in my opinion, you have the most ineffective leader in the entire sports world in Mark Emmert. I'm not sure that you could have a worse leader to run your organization than Mark Emmert. I really believe that. He's a guy that he's not going to. It's just not going to work. And he has kind of gone back and forth on what's going to happen. The schedules, look a certain way depending on the conference. I just think that you need to have some kind of top level plan, top level schedule for everybody and work in conjunction with everybody. And that's just not happening right now when it comes to Mark Emmert. Well, that's also because you're a very well-known, long-standing Mark Emmert and NCAA hater. So, I mean, we knew where this conversation was going, Tommy. We knew that. Well, I don't. I mean, I'm not going to back away from it at all. He's at one point he's talking about maybe delaying the season, for everybody. At another point, he's saying, well, we're going to leave it up to the conferences. Who knows what they're all going to do? I mean, it's just so much back and forth. And I know he's trying to figure it out as he goes along too. And this is unprecedented. But at the same time, I think he's incredibly ineffective. But we can leave it at that. The other thing I'm going to mention with college football as it relates to the University of Kansas is that they did replace their opening game schedule that was supposed to be against New Hampshire. They replace that with Southern Illinois. However, as of today, it looks like they're probably going to lose their non-conference opponent in Boston College as the ACC has decided to only play conference games this upcoming season. there could very well be no non-conference games for the University of Kansas or for Kansas State or for anybody in the Big 12. How big of a deal is that for any of these schools in the Big 12 if they end up being able to play their conference season, not having any non-conference opponents to get you ready for it?
You know, I have always thought I think football in practice, and it is one of those things you can emulate on a pretty decent level. And I have not always thought that tune-up games necessarily provided a whole lot. Obviously, there's a long-standing history of coaches that maybe disagree with me on that, but I just don't necessarily think that it means a whole lot to necessarily get yourself ready. With that being said, I also do think a lot of like we're seeing, a lot of schools may lose their non-con, but I still would be willing to bet there are going to be smaller schools who are trying to play, who are trying to make up some of the revenue they're going to lose potentially with whatever's happening with their seasons. They may be willing to step in and play these games. And I would be willing to bet a lot of the Power Five can maybe not entirely fill that non-con schedule that they had, but are going to be able to find one, maybe two games to kind of work it out, assuming that we do have football as a whole.
We'll find out what the Big 12 decides to do. At this point, they have, continued to talk a big game. Commissioner Bob Bowlesby has talked about wanting to have a full 12-game season for all of the member schools. We'll see if that continues to stay on or if changes have to be made with the Big 12 season as well. The biggest change so far with NFL are multiple players opting out of the season. This kind of started a few days ago and has continued into today. As far as the Kansas City Chiefs are concerned, in fact, the first player to opt out across the entire league for the upcoming season was a Chief, and that was Dr. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, announced that he was going to be sitting out the 2020 season, although his reason, Weston, seems to be a little bit different than everybody else's. A lot of people are talking about their own health, or maybe they have a family member that could be susceptible to COVID, or maybe they have health concerns or just had a baby or something like that. But for Dr. Duvernay-Tardif, he's serving on the front lines and wants to continue to do so. I'm not sure anybody can be upset about that.
No, absolutely not. And I don't even know really what more to add to it. I mean, there was just really an outpour, I feel like, from the NFL community and really just the sports community kind of when that announcement became public of people supporting this decision and what a courageous and, brave decision, I suppose, to make, especially to give up, millions. I mean, I think it's like $2.5 million that he would have made in the 2020 season to essentially, go and make a little bit of money as a doctor. And, I know if you're talking money, people are going to say, oh, okay, so he makes, $500,000 as a doctor, $2 million as a chief. It's not a big deal, but I think there's still a significant risk to that. And going and doing it, I mean, who knows what happens after, he's opting out of the 2020 season. He goes and takes a year off football. Who knows what his future would even hold in the NFL after something like that. I mean, you'd certainly hope and expect that he could, make his way back, and he doesn't. But when you're opting out to go be a doctor, it's not like some of the other players who can opt out, go isolate themselves in a gym for a year, stay in the best shape of their life. I mean, he's got a lot of work to do to be able to stay NFL ready, and obviously that won't even be on the forefront of his mind. So incredible move or decision. Not a lot of people would do something like that. So really cool to see Dr. LDT, and very impressed with you, Tommy, for saying Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, really smoothly nailing that one.
I'm getting better at it as the weeks go on. I know it's a little bit different and it's not the same scenario, but what does come to mind for me is somebody like Pat Tillman, right, who was in the prime of his career, left his career to go serve in our military, and unfortunately was killed in combat while he was I believe he was in Iraq. And so I know it's a little bit different than that because, Dr. Duvernay-Tardif, it's not military service, but he is serving on the front lines of a pandemic that has killed, a lot of people in this country. And he's decided that he wants to continue to serve and help people as opposed to play football. And so, I just think that's huge. And just, hats off to him for the decision that he made. The other chief as of now that has decided to opt out of the 2020 season, which I'm a little bit more surprised about this one. I'm not questioning anybody who decides to opt out, but I'm just a little bit surprised by is running back Damien Williams, who announced today that he was going to be opting out of the season. Were you surprised by that move by D. Will?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think really you're kind of surprised to some degree with any of the players. I mean, especially, maybe the players a little bit more on a personal level, and not that we know any of them personally, but that they've got children. Or I didn't know anything about Damien Williams, and I still have not heard particularly. Maybe that news is out there, but I don't know if he is just had a child or family that is sick or anything. But certainly not anything that we were expecting to hear. I think this news really. I think probably who it means the most for is Clyde Edwards Helaire. You're going to see. He's going to be the feature back, and you're going to see so much of him early and often. But I think the other two names that you have to remember that are a part of the roster are, Darrell Williams and then DeAndre Washington. I think you've got three guys that are probably all going to make the squad now that we had otherwise talked about, maybe not having room for. So I do think that probably is that news is most significant for those three moving forward.
I think you're going to see a lot of Clyde Edwards Helaire early and often this season. Yeah. There's a reason why, the Chiefs went up and got him in the first round. And I remember we talked when they drafted him back in April about, how we were on board with that draft pick. But at the same time, there were people, and I even had a question in my mind a little bit about, man, you've got all these offensive weapons. You have Damien Williams as your running back. Go get a defensive player in the first round. But instead they drafted Clyde Edwards Helaire. That draft pick looks even better now than it did back in April, considering that a guy like Damien Williams just isn't going to be a part of the team this upcoming season. What I think is interesting, kind of moving away from the Chiefs just for a second, I don't know if you follow this much, but the teams so far that have had the most opt-outs have been the New England Patriots. And this is a team that has already, they've obviously lost Tom Brady. Rob Gronkowski is not a Patriot, but they have had several players opt out over the last 24 to 48 hours. Danny Vitale, who just joined the Patriots as a free agent, he was looking at potentially being a fullback for them. He's opted out. Marcus Cannon, he's going to be out for this season. Brandon Bolden, who's a guy that's been a running back for New England for a long time and has done pretty well, he's out. Dante Hightower, that's a big name player who is opted out for the season as well. And then you've got Patrick Chung, who announced as well. So these aren't guys that are, mid-level backup guys. You're talking about, starting players for Bill Belichick's squad who have now opted out. Again, we talk about the Patriots sort of as obviously contemporaries of the Chiefs. And I know I asked you a few weeks back what you were projecting for the Patriots this upcoming season. Have all of these opt-outs, has that changed your mind at all?
I think to some degree you'd probably expect them to be even a little worse, and I think I had them, maybe right at 500 or a little bit below. But it is also the Patriot way that the next man up is always just as good. But I did hear some guys discussing, wouldn't this be like the most Belichickian style play that all these guys opt out the year that Trevor Lawrence happens to be going to be the number one pick off the board? He lost Brady, lost Gronk, has a bunch of guys opting out. If there ever was a season that the Patriots do very poorly, it would really benefit when one of the best quarterback prospects in a long time is coming up in the draft. But I don't, I'm not suggesting that is accurate, but I think that was kind of a funny thought.
Yeah, watch Cam Newton have a huge resurgence though this season. Completely revitalize his career, and then who knows what could happen at the quarterback position for the Patriots. Before we move away from the NFL, a couple of quick free agent signings for Kansas City that we want to touch on. Kelechi, how do you say his last name?
I think
Osemele? Kelechi Osemele, is that right?
Yeah, I was going to say Osemele, but yeah.
I think it's Kelechi Osemele, offensive guard. The Chiefs agreed to terms with him, and also ex-Seahawks safety Tedrick Thompson. So you've got an offensive lineman and a defensive back that the Chiefs have signed in the last 24 to 48 hours, obviously to fill some holes and, kind of plug in some different areas. But your initial thoughts on the signings of Osemele and Thompson?
Osemele, I think right off the bat, from what I've seen, I think there's a lot of potential for him to be a starter day one. It sounds like a guy that kind of had struggled with some injuries, struggled with the coaching staff that maybe he just just quite wasn't gelling with, but has some serious potential to be a very, very good guard. Tedrick, I don't know as much about. I kind of anticipate, it's a little safety depth. I would think that he'd probably be a guy that's more roster bubble necessarily than just a lock. I don't think it was that type of signing for the Chiefs, but because they've got some depth kind of in the secondary. Well, I shouldn't say in secondary. I think they need corner help and still could use some guys there. But I do think as far as the safety, strong safety, free safety position, they are pretty set. So I don't necessarily see him contributing a whole lot, maybe special teams.
So for Osemele, is he someone that they can plug him right into where Laurent Duvernay-Tardif was? I mean, I know that obviously Osemele's a guard, and so is Duvernay-Tardif. I mean, is he a guy that can come in right away and fill that position?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think so. But I also, with that being said, I don't know that that's necessarily Andy Reid's style. I think some of the guys, that have been there will get first cracks, and they've, this is what Brett Veach has done. He's drafted guys, offensive linemen in the late back ends of rounds. He's signed guys in free agency that weren't coveted, more just kind of have floating around looking for a job, UDFAs that have really worked out for him. And I think that their model is more to build from within. And so because of that, I would think you're going to see some of those guys that weren't necessarily getting as much. The name that comes to mind is Martinez Rankins. I think he kind of gets first crack at that spot where LDT has left. And maybe he was going to, you're going to have two new guards this year with LDT out. I think potentially looking at two new guards with Stephen Wesanowski, or I probably butchered that. He left in free agency. So, I think he's got a real shot, but I think you'll see the guys already on the roster that get a first crack.
So as we mentioned at the very beginning of the program, there's a lot to talk about today on Keeper of the Games. We've already gotten over our normal time, and we still have a couple more topics that we need to touch on because there's just so much happening right now. And we want to shift our gears to prep sports and fall sports at the high school level across the state of Kansas as we kick off our Wichita Whiparound here today. So, Keisha, we've been wondering for quite a while about what fall sports will look like across the state of Kansas. Will it be delayed? Will they push fall sports to the spring? As of now, Keisha has decided to stick with the normal schedule. August 17th will be the start date for fall sports practices, and the games will go on as scheduled as of right now. It's a controversial decision, I think, and it was very narrowly decided that way. 5-4 from Keisha just the other day when they met. Are you surprised by this decision? Are you on board with it? What do you think about Keisha's decision to stick with August 17th as the start date for fall sports?
I mean, I'm not surprised. To me, my thought process would be, I don't know that if the schools are open and those kids are interacting on a daily basis and everybody's on, at school, on the school grounds, I don't know that necessarily sports it needs to be done safely, but I don't know that necessarily accelerates, the risks involved, whether it starts August 17th or you push it back till September 8th. There's not going to be, to me, any difference on pushing it back, unless the pushing it back is to get, some protocols and some guidance in place. But I know they have rolled out some. I don't know that it's necessarily, and it's not from my understanding, it's not requirements, but it is. There are some guidance and protocols in place, and so to me, I don't see necessarily any reason to push things back. At least not till later in September. I can understand if you'd said, "Hey, let's do it all in the spring," but to me, it doesn't make sense to do it. Just push things back a few weeks with school already in session.
I think the interesting thing to me about this is that a lot of school districts have already decided to push back the start of classes until after Labor Day. So in-person classes will start later, but the sports games will begin earlier, which I find that interesting. I don't disagree with it necessarily. I just find it a little bit peculiar that it's okay for these kids to go and play sports and be in contact with one another that way, but not sit in a classroom. So I just think that's a little bit interesting. I know that there are different governing bodies that, sort of take a look at that, and not every school district has made that decision, but a lot of them have. With this schedule, being in place the way that it is and not being adjusted, not being delayed or pushed back, that means week number 1 for the City League for high school football will be one of the most anticipated games, and that's Northwest versus Bishop Carroll. And head coaches for both teams, that's Steve Martin for Northwest and the guy with the best name in the City League, Dusty Trail for Bishop Carroll. They gave their thoughts on what's going to be happening there with the City League and, of course, the upcoming schedule.
99.9% of the coaches that get into sports in high school do it because they want to be around kids, and I'm just glad that, we get that opportunity to be around our kids and our kids get to participate in the things they love to do.
It's just very important for these kids to be able to be involved in activities, have a sense of purpose, and, I think it's just going to help them socially and emotionally to survive what we're going through right now.
Obviously, we talked about it last week, Weston, that, football coaches want to coach, football players want to play. It looks like, as of now, they're going to get that opportunity with no delay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I kind of want to go back a little bit to what I was saying because, I get that when you're going to have some schools that have pushed back, but really I think the main thing is if KSHSAA is governing everything as a whole, to me it's, if you're going to say, hey, we're fine with things going on regularly scheduled. And if you as a school want to say, we're not putting our football team out there or tell schools in session, that's okay. But as a body, one size doesn't, as a KSHSAA body, one size doesn't fit all kind of makes sense to me. And just saying, hey, we're going to go on. If you guys have problems, that's a school by school basis can take that up. And I don't know if that's even been said, but I would assume that could be done. I mean, if a school says, hey, our guys aren't here, we're not playing until then, we need to adjust accordingly, that someone would have to listen to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were definitely delays that were going on, and they call them higher risk sports that include gymnastics, volleyball, boys soccer, and football, delaying that until September 8th. That was the original proposal, but it was voted down 5-4 by the board members of KSHSAA. They are going to, put some different protocols in place, like pretty much every league and every sport has done or will do. That includes, different kinds of social distancing, and it involves, different kinds of sideline protocols and what players can and can't do, what coaches can and can't do, and the way that things look potentially, in the stands as the season progresses. But as of now, like we mentioned, KSHSAA, they've decided that things will stay the same from a top level view, where fall sports practices will begin on August 17th. And that would mean the first football game or the first football week will begin on September 4th. So big news there in the world of prep sports around the state of Kansas. Also in our Wichita Whip Around, it's been a busy day on Keeper of the Games when this story becomes way far down in the show when we're almost wrapped up, and that's Dexter Dennis returning to the Wichita State basketball team. Had to talk about it because it is big news for the Shocker squad and for Gregg Marshall. It's kind of been hinted at that Dennis would be returning and withdrawing from the NBA draft and coming back to school, but he did make it official. That's big news for a Shocker team that's had a lot of turnover during this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The Shockers to have him back is fantastic, especially with, like you said, a lot of new guys coming in to have some leadership. And kind of funny that or maybe ironic that you say bringing him back showed some leadership with some of the issues he had with Gregg Marshall throughout the season. But there's no doubt about it, he'll be the leader of that basketball team. While this is big news, I think it's also fairly expected news. I know he wanted to go test the waters. From what I read and saw, I don't think that there was probably going to be much opportunity for him at the NBA level, at least not yet. Not getting drafted. I think he definitely has some promise and potential to make a career in the NBA, but just probably not yet.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a guy last season that did have some ups and downs. He left the team for personal reasons for a couple of games. It was kind of uncertain if he was going to come back. He did eventually come back and finish the season. He didn't play well in non-conference games, but he was also kind of working through a funk against conference competitors. He averaged 11.2 points a game and 5.6 rebounds per game. And I think the biggest thing is stability. I mean, he led the Shockers in minutes per game last season with, I think, like 25, a little over 25 minutes per game. And so I think that's going to be really big, almost 26 minutes a game, actually, last season for the Shockers. But what I'm really excited for this season for Gregg Marshall and the Shockers is the backcourt, because now that Dexter Dennis is back, they also brought in UConn graduate transfer Altariq Gilbert, and it looks like Dennis and Gilbert are going to be sharing the backcourt together. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch because I think those two can mesh really well.
Well, and the other thing he brings too is defense. I mean, he's a fantastic defensive player, and the thing about having a guy like that is, to me, defense can be so contagious. When you see one of your teammates getting after it on the ball, scrapping, for a steal or whatever that might be, to me, that's contagious, more so than necessarily than offense can be. I mean, I know shooting at times can be contagious, it feels like, but really defense is an effort thing, right? And when you see one of your guys really busting it to get that done on the defensive end of the floor, I think it kind of elevates everybody. So to have him back doing that, I think is going to really bring that Shocker defense up as a whole.
Absolutely. As of right now, it sort of looks like the Shockers' projected rotation for this upcoming season will be Altariq Gilbert and Tyson Etienne in the backcourt. And then, Dexter Dennis could be in the backcourt sometimes, but he's probably going to play small forward there a little bit too. Trey Wade and Morris Udeze will probably end up being in the front court for the Shockers. So I know a lot of instability and a lot of uncertainty with the Shockers squad during the offseason, but it does look like with Dexter Dennis returning that there is some stability and some experience and a veteran player coming back to Wichita. That's our Wichita Whip Around here on Keeper of the Games. And Weston, we can't wrap up the show without our Finally Funny. And, I know we already mentioned Pat Mahomes on the program. I think it's time to mention him just really quickly again, just because of how great of a year that guy's having. I mean, obviously he's a Super Bowl champion and he gets the richest contract in sports history. He becomes part owner of the Kansas City Royals. And I don't know how funny this is, or maybe it's just more that I'm envious, but did you get a chance to look at his new ride that Patrick Mahomes has and he's riding around in? I mean, that guy is living the life right now.
Yeah, Louis Riddick from ESPN calls him Ferrari Pat, and that brand new Ferrari is very fitting of the nickname for sure. Between his golf outings with Travis Kelce, the Ferrari, part of the Royals team, this guy is, he's living. That is the epitome of saying living the dream. He really is right now.
Yeah. Well, what I think is funny too is that, just the contrast when you look at the rest of the world and what's happening right now. I mean, 2020 has not been a positive year at all for anybody except for Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Like, I think he would look back in 20 or 30 years and be like, 2020 was actually a pretty good year for me.
Yeah. No. And I guess in my list too, I forgot to mention, the $500 million he got. So yeah, doing all right for Patrick Mahomes in 2020.
Yeah, if you've not had a chance to see Pat's new whip, and I think that might be the first time I've ever used the word whip, and I don't know if I'll ever say it again because it didn't really sound right coming out of my mouth. But if you want to see his new whip, we definitely encourage you to check it out. We should probably also tweet it out as well because, it's a bright green Ferrari and it looks legitimate. It looks sick. And so we should tweet that out on the Cog Pod Twitter account. That way you can take a look at that. But no, certainly the summer of Pat. And I guess it's funny, but it's also fun and more power to him. Hats off to him. And really, I think we just wanted another reason to talk about Pat Mahomes today.
Yeah, I never have a complaint. I think you talked in the beginning of the show about the contractual obligation. I think that was my contractual obligation with you, that if we were going to do this podcast, we had to talk about Pat Mahomes at least once a week or once every other week at a minimum.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to fight you on that. I'm happy to talk about him whenever we can. So I know we've ran a little bit over our allotted time. Typically, we like to stay right around an hour. I know today was a longer show, but just a lot to get to and a lot to talk about here in the world of sports. And I love that, Weston, considering that now we have some sports back and we can actually analyze things. Talking about the Royals, it was legitimate sports analysis and it was fantastic.
I know. And hopefully that doesn't scare some of our listeners away going, oh, wait, these guys actually don't know sports at all. Shoot, what are we listening to for the last 3 months?
Yeah, we were able to keep that illusion up, I think, for long enough. It might be fading away now, but hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Keeper of the Games. Don't forget to hit subscribe, so whenever we have a new episode of the show, you'll get a notification. Again, you can listen to us anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. That's like on iTunes and Google Podcasts and iHeartRadio, Spotify, basically all the major podcast publishers out there. It's important that you hit subscribe. That way you get a notification, especially as sports come back. We're going to try to do more episodes of the podcast, and that That way you'll know exactly when we drop a brand new episode. You can visit our website at cogpod.weebly.com, find out more about us. You can watch full episodes there. You can also watch episodes on Facebook and on YouTube just by searching for Keeper of the Games. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's at KOG Pod. And again, a special thanks to Title Boxing Club at 21st and Rock Road in the shops at Tallgrass. So I think, Weston, with that, I think we just need to get your Twitter handle and we can get out of here.
At WMills94.
All right. And you can, of course, follow me at Tweets from Tommy. Until next time, for Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor. You've been listening to Keeper of the Games.
Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's KOG Pod.